Thank you very much, Jim. First of all, thank you for having me, and especially changing the hours to accommodate the time zone that I'm in this week. So thank you very, very much for that. So it's my pleasure being hosted here in the Google developer community. I think that the topic today is very relevant towards developers, and it's something that we see quite a lot about evolutionary changes in the space. And as you mentioned in the intro, AI is also coming into this space. So this is also a huge opportunity to create some kind of a discussion about where we're going with this field, how it's going to be changed by AI, and actually all the cool things that AI can offer already today, especially in application security. So maybe I'll start with a quick introduction to myself, and it would make more sense how we got to this discussion. So before starting Ox Security, 10 years at Checkpoint, leading the cybersecurity business unit. And as part of this process, we analyzed a lot of malware. And back in 2017, we were one of the first ones to analyze events like NotPetya. And we were really impressed by the way that the threat actors were able to embed their code into an existing code base and leverage it to become a backdoor. And it created the passion to actually figure out, okay, how do we make application security, I would say, great again? Because for years, the industry has been crying on so many different things that are wrong in application security, and nobody picked up the ball and say, let's redo things. The industry for years is built from different technology, different silos. They don't talk to each other. They're just thinking about the security person in the room, not necessarily about the developer. They're not providing each one of them a great solution. And we were trying to figure out how can we build something as users and guys that were accountable for application security. How can we build something that really addresses the modern reality of application security? It is mostly cloud native. It is in a place that we can understand the implications of what we're doing. But up until now, nobody did it. So I'll start by describing what we saw when we entered this field, and maybe it will create more sense to the journey that we went through. So when we started understanding this ecosystem, we saw that developers right now are trying to figure out what's my best way to understand the code I'm writing. Is it risky? Yes or no? What is it? What do I need to do to fix it?
One quick question, Neatsun, before we get into it. I know you're giving an introduction. I didn't know if you wanted to be showing slides yet or not, but if you're not, that's fine because they're not showing. But if you wanted to show slides, they're not showing yet.
I'll do this in a second. We'll go to the first slide. But just to create the intro to this presentation, what we're going to talk about. So we're basically going to talk about how do we take the current needs of application security and try to figure out a new way to do them. So let me share my slides right now.
All right.
So Jim, I hope you can see my slide right now.
Yep, it's looking good.
Okay. So the journey that we started saying, okay, we understand that we've seen software supply chain attacks, we've seen application security issues, and we need to figure out how do we get it to the modern world? How do we make sure that it is evolving in the pace that application development is going on? But the challenge that we are seeing is that when you go to development teams and release teams, what you see is that they're still saying products are still being released with critical vulnerabilities inside of them. And since there are a huge amount of vulnerabilities and huge amount of code base, especially not maintained, it is very common that products that are getting released with critical vulnerabilities. Now, the issue behind this is that think about organizations to work with might find themselves in a situation where they're managing a backlog of 1 million open issues. And if they just try to take them and push them towards engineering teams, they would get a pushback saying, look, this is not deployed. This is not connected to the internet. This is this case, which is mitigated by this compensating control. And it becomes very hard to have this discussion on each one of the vulnerabilities out there. And of course, usually application security is outrun by developers, at least in ratio of 1 to 100. And this gets you to the point that you can't triage any issue, and you kind of need to find an automated way to do this. So it causes a situation, there is always a constant friction between security and development, just to understand what is the ground truth that both parties are talking about. And as we're getting to this friction, it is very hard to find those skills people that support those silos that create those lists of issues for us, because maintaining a good Appsec practice is very, very hard, especially in a place where developers and security have some friction between them. So with the tools that we have in place, it is really very, very hard to understand what is really a critical risk versus a hygiene risk. And as such, you get very fast to the situation. You're saying, look, you're saying a lot of things, but I'm not sure which one of them is really a risk for me versus just a hygiene risk. So it causes the security backlog to constantly grow, and we miss critical issues because it's a huge number and it's very easy to get lost in it. So bottom line, it's difficult to get the certified and maintain all the requirements to do with regulations that we have. And it is right now the standard in most of the organizations that we work with. So Jim, I'll pause here for a second to ask if you've got any questions, or should we progress?
I don't see any questions in the chat, but as you're going through this slide with all the different tools and all the the complicated setup that a lot of people are dealing with nowadays, I'm remembering back to the good old days of the year 2000, where you're just slinging out code and then pushing it straight into production, no security scans, just let it fly. And now it's just the amount of information coming back from tools that developers have to deal with. It just seems pretty overwhelming.
So absolutely. I think that my first experience with the field was when we created the first penetration testing to one of the products that we're going to release. And somebody created a video of them taking the product still in development and being able to actually dump the entire database. And we're looking and saying, that is impossible. What have you done? And that was a very long time ago when I figured out that there is such a thing called application security. And as you were going through this, you actually saw, wow, this is amazing. An Excel person can come and actually tweak the way that we build the system and find the exact holes inside of it to dump the entire database. And seeing it for the first time, there's a big, big mental jump from saying, I know that there is such a thing in the world, to, oh my God, the application that we've built as a team is right now being done or going through this process of being dumped and hacked. So this notion of it's possible, just how do I do it? That's mind-blowing. But what happens in most organizations is they don't have the ability to triage each one of the issues, and they're trying to figure out the entire application security like in 3 KPIs. How can I tell the entire story of my organization just in 3 KPIs? Issue number 1 that they're looking on is, do we have security coverage on all of my applications? So that is, do I see all of my applications right now? Do I get to the place that I've got all the technologies covering those applications? And basically trying to understand, do I even have a good understanding, what am I looking at? What is my estate like? In most companies that hadn't started just in the past, I would say, month, you get very fast to the situation that you're saying, I don't know what is the issue, what are the applications. So right now, it's something that you need to take care of the coverage issue. Now, once you understand the coverage, you've got all the tools, you've got everything ramped up, the next question is, okay, how do I fix all of this? And if you've got a million issues in place, the next question is, okay, do you actually need to address all of those million? Or maybe I can find some initial indicators saying, what is not the risk for me? And this is what we call the remediation SLA. In the remediation SLA, you're thinking about how do I fix critical within 48 hours? How do I fix high within a week? And in order to get to that, you need to kind of understand what is really a high. Now, the standard way that the industry is doing it right now is saying, let's take the vulnerability and understand what is the meaning of this vulnerability by ranking. Now, those ranking, if you look on the definition, the way that they are structured is saying, what if I have my nuclear plant connected directly to the internet and I would have this vulnerability in my organization? So it's assuming supercritical asset connected to the internet and there are no compensating control. This is the way that the CVSS score is actually calculated. And in reality, it's not a case, because sometimes it is not connected to the internet. Sometimes it is not exposed through any API. Sometimes the conditions to run this exploit is simply not there. And now we need to figure out, okay, what's out of all of the known vulnerabilities in the organization, which one of them can actually be exploited and are meaningful to our organization? Once you figure those two, the next question becomes, okay, what's the trend? Am I in a situation that I'm losing control or gaining control over the system? Are the numbers going up or down? So once you kind of figure those three elements, you know how to control the application security program from the beginning to the end. Hope it makes sense to you, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, like with all that data coming back, is this thing that's a high really a high, or is it actually getting delivered into an air-gapped environment where no, it's not really going to be a problem, so maybe we can live with that. Let's put it down to the bottom of the backlog. Maybe we'll get to it sometime, but it's not really important to do this one. But maybe a medium that's internet facing is like, you really need to get to this one because it's out there with the chance to get a chance to get attacked. But maybe there's a compensating control you can put in place. Maybe you have a software-defined firewall or something you can put in there and really narrow down the attack surface. So maybe that one's also not a big deal. But yeah, that ability to help create the backlog, a smart backlog, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you can take it to places like, if you recall Log4j, just a year and a half ago. If you recall, it was a month of madness trying to figure out where is it deployed? Is it actually reachable from the internet? Mm-hmm. And just answering all of those questions, saying, what is the operating system that I need to do? Do I need a certain version of Java? Is it deployed in production? And all of those questions got us to ask deeper questions, saying, I understand that I need to have this version of Java deployed on the same level of container, and do this, and do that, and not have transitive dependencies, and so many things that you basically say, look, in reality, I see 1,000 instances of Log4j. Those three should be handled first. Those have all the criteria that can be externally exposed. The rest, yes, it's good to talk about the hygiene of your backlog, because in reality, we've seen in sophisticated attacks that you've aggregated attacks one after another. So yes, definitely make sure to be hygiene, but priority-wise, that would be a second level priority versus I can be breached directly. Mm-hmm. Okay, moving on. So what we figure out is that we kind of need to understand that the application security program is not something that is broken in one specific place. It is broken in a lot of different places. So this is what we try to do, is actually create a new concept that we call the application security data fabric, which is, imagine you've got all the information about your application security in one place, starting from the identity of the developers up to where it is actually going to be deployed in the cloud, what APIs are going to be externally exposed. And then you can actually connect all the dots to say, what is the context of each one of the issues? And then understand whether you want to treat it seriously or as a hygiene problem. So the first thing you need to do is see and understand everything within your organization. If you don't see everything, you can't decide things. You can't get to smart decisions. So you kind of need to understand where are all of my applications, what's inside of them, what are the critical issues, who is handling them, and just get to the place that you're understanding things from the beginning to the end. Then really focusing on what matters in the context of your organization with the risk appetite of your organization. And then be able to actually prevent risks at scale. From the moment that you start coding up until the moment that it is deployed in the cloud, providing value to external services. So once you figure out this is the loop that we need to kind of create a feedback loop from, this is where we're starting our journey from the code to the cloud and securing this entire journey. So how do you do this? We found a way using the application security data fabric, and you can see it right here, to actually take all this information from either third-party tools that are already deployed or our own tools and get them concentrated in one place. So each one of the tool can actually, this data can talk with this data, can be correlated with this data, and have everything in a single place. And this is supporting over 100 different vendors across the industry, allowing everything to get to a single place, being able to look on the entire journey from the beginning to the end. Now, if I'm splitting it to sections, you'll see 4 major sections: the source control itself, the CI/CD itself, the registry, and the cloud context. So in the first beginning, you want to make sure that the Git posture is in place. You are able to do code reviews, your users are known, have multi-factor authentication, and just the posture of your Git. Then you want to make sure that the code is secure. There are no secrets and PII embedded inside of them, especially if it's a public repository. Open source security, SBOM, infrastructure as a code, CI/CD posture, container, and it goes to the APIs, the cloud deployment, and CSPMs of the world. Now, once you see this entire data, I would say Appsec data fabric, the next thing that we're going to address is, okay, right now in your backlog, you're going to see 115,000 issues. But out of them, we can say just 1% have some kind of a risk method or related method with them right now. So we're going to do here, as you can see, over 100x reduction in number of issues that require attention. And the question becomes really fast, okay, what enables you to do this? So the issue behind the scene of what we're going to see here is that every issue that we're going to do or understand, we're going to understand what is the context of this. And we're asking the context in 3 dimensions: whether it is reachable, exploitable, and what would be the associated damage if it is reachable and exploitable by somebody. So in this case, you're going to see we found here an active GitHub access token in a private repository. Then we're saying, look, it's right now an active secret. We connected using the secret. We saw it's live. We know it's a SaaS service, so it's not an internal thing. If somebody gets a hold of this token, they can connect to it from the outside. It is part of the application layer, so it is visible. It is deployed right now in a place that is externally exposed, yet it is a private repo. And we see that it is right now just using single-factor authentication. So let's say that somebody gets this, they don't have a multi-factor authentication to even protect this, meaning no compensating control. And if somebody gets a hold of this, inside of it, you can find PII processing and payment information. So once you're able to communicate this to security and to developer, and each one of them is backed by evidence, meaning you're actually going to hover on top of each one of them and get to see exactly the pieces of code that are evidence that this is indeed true. And once you're able to create this, you can create trust between engineering and security out of them. Jim, I hope so far it makes sense.
It does. Just had a question in the back of my mind. I know we want to see everything, and looks like there's a lot of pre-built integrations into known tools. I always wonder about those. I don't know if it's an unknown, but say, people have been in the industry long enough. they've always heard about, hey, there's you have your IT department, they're writing the code, they're doing things, they have standards, they have a security team. But then occasionally you have a product guy just hires a contractor team, fires up something into a different cloud, starts selling stuff out of there. Do you have recommendations for customers as they're onboarding? Like how do we find all this stuff that we actually need to integrate so that then we can really see everything?
Yes. So I'll probably say that there are two different approaches we see right now in the main market. Number one is saying we're outsourcing this, but you as an external vendor, you're also accountable for security.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning when you're showing us a version or introducing a new version, it needs to come with a scanner. We don't care which one of them that shows us we scanned your code base. Here's the result. Now, if you're able to get to that, you're basically removing the direct responsibility from your organization to a third party. Of course, it needs to come with some kind of an agreement regarding compensation in case of a cybersecurity attack or insurance, I would say, undertaking. And this gets you to the place that you're saying, basically, it's not me doing this. If there will be an issue, I have the consequences of reputation, but the rest is handled by a third party. I've seen this approach. It seems clean. It is never clean, as you know, in anything like cyber. It gets you to a weird situation saying, yeah, but I told you, I wrote, we've warned, and so on. It's very hard to deal with those cases. The second approach is saying, guys, when you're submitting the code, you're not keeping the code, you're pushing it to our own code repository.
Mm-hmm.
The build that is going to be released is going to be released with our certificate under our services. We own the quality. We understand that if there is a cyber event, we will be accountable for this, but we're thinking about it and planning for the day after tomorrow. It is usually the preferred approach. If you can afford it, it is more expensive. But this is usually for companies that understand that if something happens to their brand, they're going to lose a lot of money. So they're spending security upfront for those to protect their brand.
We do have a question from the chat from Hayden, and maybe you can answer it now, or maybe it'll be something for later. Specifically around supply chain vulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Wondering how and where you can. Is there a way in Ox or somewhere else to identify supply chain vulnerabilities?
Yeah. So first of all, supply chain vulnerabilities is a very broad statement. It can start with open source. It can go to CI/CD posture. It can go to different variations. So I'll probably say that the way to think about software supply chain is just like any other vulnerabilities, but it is something that the implications of a software supply chain is usually something that is way higher. Because let's say that I poison open source and it has a community of thousands of users, then my poisoning attempt will get to a massive number of projects. And this is really, really bad. So I wouldn't say it's completely different for everything else. It's just that the implication can have a serious power multiplier. Now, how do you find those? There is a framework that we are part of the creators of, which is called the OSCAR framework, the Open Software Supply Chain Attack Reference. It is hosted under the website pbom.dev, pipeline bill of material.dev, and I'll show it really fast. And it's a MITRE-like framework where the idea is to take the concept of how do threat actors think about application security and software supply chain, and understand whether it can be used by attackers and how will they run the attack itself, from reconnaissance to initial access, persistence, and data exfiltration. So the way that I would recommend to think about it is throughout the stages in the application security data fabric, those are the way to cover all of your software supply chain from the beginning to the end. It includes things that are from the code level to artifact integrity and signing, up to the cloud, making sure that there are no interventions within your software supply chain, step by step.
I think this is the first time. I thought I've heard of all the all of the different BOMs, but the pbom.dev looks like I'm gonna have to do some deep diving into that.
So I'll write it down and we'll do it in a second. I'll try to go over it and explain it. But definitely in terms of bombs, I think that every week we've got a new kind of bomb, even though the number of letters is kind of capped. I'm starting to see duplications. For example, we started hearing more and more about CBOM, which is cryptography bill of material. And a few days back, somebody said to me, "Why aren't you showing the CBOM?" Saying, "We do have cryptography bill of material." I said, "No, we need cloud bill of material." I said, "Okay, that's the first, but I think C is already taken." But everybody with his own.
All right. No, that's great. No questions in the chat, so let's keep rolling.
Okay, so now that you got to the place that you have the visibility, you have the backing, you understand how to fix them, the question is, how do you create an automated response? Because part of the challenge with application security as a field is that you do a design, you do a security design, and now somebody goes to implement it, and the next time that you're going to have a security involved in the game is usually using the penetration testing stages. But we want to make sure that you don't do foolish stuff while you're developing. So the question is, how do you create a process that creates the culture of automated response to the user? How do you democratize the entire process of understanding application security and making sure that both developers have the right to act on it in a free way? And how do you automate it so it will fit the culture of your organization? So last week I had a panel, and on stage we had somebody representing a big bank, a company that is post-IPO, and a company that is pre-IPO. And we asked the question, who owns application security? And the simple answer was the pre-IPO company said, look, the business unit owns the risk themselves. That's easy. They can decide whatever they want. The post-IPO guys said, look, in reality, it's something that we take as a security thing. We own the risk, but the business owner can do an exception. And when you get to the bank, you're saying, okay, we've got a risk committee. They determine it. Nobody else can override it because the risk is simply too high to do exceptions without thinking about them thoroughly. So the question is now, how would every organization would react to an event? And what we're seeing here is the ability to actually, for each organization, say, my policy is like this, and we want to react in such a way. And this is what we are presenting here, the ability to actually understand how to do automated response that is tailored per organization. So the question becomes, what if we can push it even further and try to figure out, can we use new concepts that we're going to introduce very soon that we call them micro LLM rules? And think about those rules as a new concept in the market where it's very common in machine learning to figure out if this is the entire space that we are occupying. And I need to identify something in that space. I can create this kind of a bubble saying if it's within this size of a bubble, then I'll detect it. So you're going to capture a lot of space. So you're going to capture something. But in return, you're going to do a lot of false positives.
Mm-hmm.
If I'll do a smaller one, I'll capture less, but less false positive. If I'll do something very, very small, then lower catch rate and lower false positive. Now, when we're thinking about how can we use new technologies to do detection, up until now, human analysts wrote rules in application security that are usually that big. They had to capture things. That's the important thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we've got LLMs, what we can do with them is take those huge detections and break them down into hundreds of very, very small and accurate rules. And instead of looking on things in resolution like in the 60s, we can look at them in 4K and just say, oh, now I understand what am I seeing actually, the details. I want to capture this, this, and this, and ignore this part over here, which is just false positive. And we're starting to see more and more of those technologies that our research guys are trying to leverage them to simply deliver better results. And remember that in false positive, this is where developers and security get into friction. If security comes to developers and say, look, you've got here a lot of false positives, you're going to have a very unsatisfied engineering population, and they will not collaborate if you're going to do this 2 or 3 times down the road. So it's simply about delivering this value.
Quick question. Tanuj was wondering about the automated response system. How does it work to prevent risks and avoid backlog? Like how does it handle the minor versus major pull requests? Is it at a pull request stage, or what actions are taken for each? Kind of, I guess, more into the details of how is it actually able to do that?
So Tanuj, great question. And I'll tell you that it really differs by the culture of the company. There are companies that their entire mentality is developer empowerment. What you're going to see in those companies is usually that you do not block code from reaching production. What you're doing is you're basically notifying the user on what does it mean, the action that you just took. So let's say that you use Slack to communicate with that user specifically and say, look, you just delivered the code. Here's the issue that we see with it. Here's the recommendation. So that would be something that is very empowering. Nobody sees that you've done this mistake. It's very personal. It's a one-to-one experience. When there are other options, it depends on the culture, that on the build itself, the results of the build, you're going to place notification saying you've done something wrong. Some teams are more sensitive to that, and they consider that to be non-empowering. Now, the idea is that since every organization might have a different culture, this is why we built the no code. It allows you to understand in what situation would you like to take a different action. Now, what Tanuj is actually implying here is saying that there are different action items that needs to be taken care in different situation. So he's mentioning here, I hope Tanuj is he, if not them, then what they are implying is saying, okay, there might be a place that they're saying, if it's a minor fix, I want to take one route. If it's a major fix, I want to do something else. Now, why is it important? If you've got a minor version, usually the APIs will not change within a minor version. You'll probably have the same APIs. The probability that you're going to break, for example, an open source, if you upgrade from version 1 to 1.1, is way less likely than moving from version 1 to version 8. Because the assumption is in smaller versions, you try not to break the interfaces. Now, there are a lot of those small things that you can add to the business logic. For example, you might say, if right now there is a minor version, then I want it to be fixed. I actually want to create a pull request for you with a recommendation for the fix. If, on the other hand, there is only a major version that fixes this issue, then it might be that the only opportunity that you have to upgrade is during the major next build. It might be a quarterly build. It might be that the only way to fix it is in the next time that you're replacing Docker-based image. And this might drive different decisions saying, I understand that this is a critical issue, but in reality, we cannot upgrade the Docker operating system today. There's simply no way for us to deliver something with this. So we'll need to think about compensating control. So this is kind of the consideration that you need to address when you're thinking about how do you do your application security as a program that can scale. So I want to show one last interesting thing which is how do you take it actually to understand things in production. So what I'm going to show you right now is how do things look like in reality. So I'm going to share something from the actual product. So what I'm doing here is right now I'm looking on a live system, and I will start with open sources because it's easier for people to relate to this. And the first thing that I'm going to show is actually how does an attack tree look like. So imagine that you've got this data fabric, everything is written in a single place. Now we know that there is an open source issue. So what I'm going to ask is actually, okay, prove to me what is the case. So we're saying, okay, it is reachable, exploitable, and we can see potential damage for every part of it. Then we're saying, okay, who actually did this change? Because we will need to talk with this person, either using Slack or Jira or Teams or boards, whatever you've got, and when was this inserted? And then asking, okay, what kind of intelligence do we know about this to be true? So in this case, we see what are the associated vulnerabilities, licenses, compliance requirements we are trying to comply with, and the OSCAR framework that we talked about, and the common weaknesses. So once we understand per issue, then we're going towards the next section, saying what kind of application is it? And you can see that inside of this application, it has access to payment and to PII within the organization. So next we're asking, okay, what kind of APIs are we exposing? And here you can see that there are actually 108 APIs that are exposing this open source. Going back to the artifact container registry, saying, what do we see over here? So we're seeing that inside the container registry, in this case, Amazon ECR, we've created an image that is later on deployed to a Kubernetes cluster. And this Kubernetes cluster has an ingress from the internet. It is deployed to an AWS account that is routing all the traffic inwards. And it has access to also a few cloud services. So now that we understand the full picture of the risk in context, we are able to figure out where do we want to actually have this conversation about the risk itself. So far it makes sense.
It does make sense. And just I noticed the name of the application is Juice Shop. Does that happen to be the OWASP Juice Shop?
It is. It is.
I'll post it. I'll post it in the chat. But for those who haven't, who have heard of the OWASP Top 10, there's an OWASP Juice Shop application that is vulnerable. So if you ever wanted to test out your hacking or defending skills, you can get a vulnerable application installed and try and compromise it.
So what I really like about this as an example is that it has several languages. It's every service goes to a different container. It's very diverse in its nature. It's not like hack the box in one specific case. It actually introduces a variety of topics and skills in different levels.
Nice.
So good catch on that one. Okay, so the last thing that we talked about was simply the attack trees themselves, and it allows you to understand everything in context, and from there you can scale your program. So as promised, I want to also show the OSCAR framework and understand a bit what it is. Okay, so I just browsed to pbomb.dev. Hope you can see my screen.
Yep.
And as you can see, this is OSCAR, the Open Software Supply Chain Attack Reference. And what you're going to see here is a MITRE-like framework, which is starting from reconnaissance on the left to resource development, initial access, execution, persistence, privilege escalation, defense evasion, credential access, lateral movement, collection, exfiltration, and impact. So this is how most threat actors think about the cybersecurity software supply chain attack. How do I find my target? How do I penetrate them? How do I create persistence? And how do I actually carry out what I wanted to do in the first place? Now, for each one of them, this framework allows you to understand what are the known techniques that are actually being used in the wild. So each one of them is simply a clickable option saying, what is the actual vulnerability in third-party CI/CD application? How do you mitigate them? And simply have an understanding about what is this technique. Now, all of those MITRE framework or OSCAR framework related topics are actually things that we took in as the basis of our technology, saying, okay, we kind of understand how to do each one of them. Now, can we build something that allows you to think about them in stages? So what we've done to implement this as part of Ox is we created a view of all the applications inside the organization. And now you're actually able to look on an application through the lens of OSCAR. And the idea is that if you can connect the left side of the house to the right side of the house, then you've got an ability to do the perfect storm within the organization. So over here, you can see, okay, we have some kind of an exposed storage in our organization that creates a very interesting footprint to do reconnaissance. If you go inside of it, you can actually see, what does it mean? Where is it part of my organization? Who is the person that I should talk with? How do I fix this issue? And it allows you to think about the entire program as something that you've got full visibility on the entire landscape. And from them, you can understand exactly how to automate and create the best remediation to meet the SLA.
On the inputs that are coming in to Ox, I know we got the source code repository, so we know people's identities from there to know who did code changes. Do you also pull in data from systems like ServiceNow that also have ideas of who did what, who did the deployment, maybe? Because you know who did the code, but maybe who did the deployment? I don't know, just curious on what's all getting pulled in, because that the threat, I forgot what you called it, but how things are tied together, and you see all the intelligence around it and where this code eventually goes, which is a lot of times hard, because if you're at the end and you're in production, and you're like, how did this even get here, to be able to track back, who did what looks. I don't know how many hours I've spent trying to track down who did what over the years. Just curious what kind of things are getting pulled in to make that happen.
I'll show it. So what you're going to see here is, I'll take once again an open source issue. So what you're going to see is, first of all, how is an application getting to be deployed in the internet? So we're seeing you've got the GitHub issue, let's say in this case from Ox Shop. Then you're seeing that it gets built using a CI/CD, and in parallel there's also a GitHub action. Now, those two are creating an I would say container that is stored in Amazon ECR. You can see all the details here. And this ECR is then later on found running in your AWS account. So once we are able to connect all the dots, what we created from this is what we call an artifact integrity page or lineage that understands, for everything that you see right now in the cloud, for every I would say instance running, where is it coming from in terms of the registry? What's the code that created it? Who is the owner of the code? And from this, you can actually understand in a nice way, how do I associate the issue to a person? So I'll go back to the open source as an example. And what you're going to see is that we're going to research the commits that introduce this code. So you can actually see exactly who did and introduced this code and what is the associated issue with it. And now we can say, okay, I understand the details. Let's just see how to fix this code instead of just trying to work this ourselves. And this is taking the idea of saying, do we have a minor version, a major version, and trying to actually see this. And from here, you can simply automate the pull request to fix the issue for you. All you have to do is just approve the PR itself.
That's pretty cool stuff. Just thinking of all the other signals that could be captured there, and I don't know if you do them. Not signals, but see, you've been running this system for a while. It's collecting the data. and now you see that somebody that normally doesn't deploy stuff is now deploying things? Is there any like red flags that come up because of like, hey, maybe someone should check out why is why is this guy on the Linux team now deploying a whole bunch of, I don't know, whatever applications. Maybe that's a bad example, but it just, there's people doing stuff that they don't normally do. Maybe somebody should check it out.
I'd probably say that we've got a few hundreds of customers, and we hear a lot of those horror stories of. We recently had this case off. Usually it starts like that, and you say, okay, so what exactly is the issue? And it's always something in that spirit, saying somebody did something. He was not able, or he was not supposed to do this. He was not supposed to have access to this. And it's always the same concept, saying, how do I actually create this understanding of what roles and responsibilities, and create some kind of a mechanism that says trust but verify.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that right now, in an empowering culture, trust by verify, that's a great thing. But right now we're missing a lot of those verify things.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we're trying to address.
Okay, so it's still an open problem to be solved, it sounds like.
I'd probably say that we've got a good monitoring system for this. We also have great ways to prevent it from happening and reaching production. I'd probably say that the prevention itself is something that it's still very hard for users to actually implement. So most of them are saying, I want to prevent bad code from being inserted from my code base,
Mm-hmm.
rather than saying, I don't want a container containing bad things to actually be deployed in production. It is way harder to enforce it.
Gotcha. All right. I don't see any questions in the chat, but if you do have questions for Neatsun, they're more than welcome. And thanks for those questions that we have had. Did you walk through all the things that you wanted to show us, or is there anything that
No,
is anything awe-inspiring that we haven't seen yet?
There are a few that are going to be announced over the coming weeks and months. Always interesting to see new technologies in play. As you know, trends like secure by design are starting to pick up, and there are great ways to innovate on that front as well.
All right. While we're waiting for some more questions, there's one question I always ask our speakers. It's not a technology question, although it's more of a career question. Our speakers have usually been quite experienced in the field, gone through life, and sometimes you have college students or other people that are young in their career that join us here. If you were to think through any like career guidance, maybe something inspiring, maybe something just that you've found that has been useful for you, any kind of career advice to give to those maybe just entering the technology field? I guess it could be in any field, but anything that you'd like to share?
So specifically in development or more in the security space?
Let's go with the security space. Let's go with that one.
Okay, so I think that there are a few things that it took me a good while to understand. First of all is that breaches do happen once in a while. You can prepare for it. You can make sure that you can do everything right, but there is no way to prevent 100% of the cases. So in order to be ready for that state of mind, you need to think about resiliency and anti-fragility. It usually takes time to get to understand this, because in the beginning, usually people are trying to think about the basic things, because they hadn't experienced the things that are outside of the curve. The more years that you're going to spend in this field, you're going to see more of the outliers. And those outliers, you're going to see like the once in a year thing, and the once in 3 years. And the more, I would say, they're on the fringe side, the bigger they are, the stronger they are, and find good mentors to learn from. Usually doing it by yourself and just trying to discover everything from scratch, it's a very hard way. It's a great way to learn, but unnecessarily you need to spend that much of a time to invent everything from scratch. You can learn a lot from people around you, be part of communities, understand how and why people are thinking in a different way from you, and simply try to incorporate this to the DNA. Now, as you're progressing through this journey, I hear a lot of people are getting to the place that they're starting to feel a bit burned down. And once again, lean into your network. A network is not something that you build in one day. It's an investment you constantly need to do. And having this community to constantly support you and constantly have somebody to talk with, especially when you've got a security incident or a suspicious activity, just leaning into this network and saying, guys, I'm seeing this and this. Can somebody just help me for a second? And it's a major thing. So I would probably say, if there's one thing that I would recommend, is simply building the network from day number one.
No, that's thank you for that. It's definitely a thing that accrues over time, constant work at it, and it's more of a. I found the networks that are the most useful are the ones where people are helping each other, not necessarily just trying to get something from someone else, but hey, how can I help you? And then maybe you'll help me later, but I don't know. Maybe you won't be able to, but let me help you out here, and we'll see where it goes from there. All right, maybe one final question from Rhonda. Do you have any websites that you'd recommend to practice? In these dev tools, maybe like in dev tools in the security space, or these Appsec tools. I know we do have pbomb.dev, which is a nice consolidation of like the entire like a threat landscape. But any other places that you'd recommend people dig into?
So I'd probably say that there are two different directions that I would take. Number one is simply reading the newspaper. There are a few popular ones like Dark Reading and Krebs on Security and a few others. And definitely those are the newspaper, just to read what's going on in the industry. The second thing that I would probably recommend is, if you want to get to understand application security specifically, try the tools that have a PLG motion, that have access to the tools themselves to play with them. We've got this version online. You can actually play with it and just understand how it goes. But there are other tools as well in the industry. Play with them a bit. It gives you kind of an idea about how do things look like in scale. If you want to practice the Google juice shop industry, just look on them, and you can easily play with them, deploy them on their own. I think they've got a very, very nice Helm chart that you can simply use to run them in a very, very easy way. So definitely, yes, exactly. You can find them on GitHub. And I'll write here our website if you would like to view it. And if not, feel free to ask me over LinkedIn questions of where to get more information. I'll be happy to assist.
No, that's awesome. So I think at this point, we'll wrap things up with the Neatsun, and we'll transition into the second part. But before we do that, just round of applause. Thank you for taking the time to spend with us. Definitely connect with Neatsun on LinkedIn and follow what Ox is doing in this space, and what they're doing with the pbomb.dev as a community model. Hopefully other people find it useful and maybe contribute in the future. So thank you, Neatsun. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.